Welcome to the Momentum Flow podcast, where ideas, innovations, and experiences are shared to create a continuous stream of inspiration and insight. Join me, your host, Luis Solana, a supply chain expert and investor, as I uncover how visionary founders, operators, and leaders are spotting opportunities, sparking innovation, and scaling profitable growth. From plan to cash, I bring real-world experience and an investor's eye to reveal how clarity, capital, and conviction fuel sustainable growth. Tune in and let's keep the momentum flow going. For decades, supply chains were optimized for effectiveness and then efficiency, cost, speed, scale. But there's a different way to think about supply chain and logistics, one that doesn't begin with cost, but with consequence. In the military, logistics isn't a support function, it's a mission capability. It determines readiness, it determines availability, and in the most critical moments, it determines outcomes. Today's conversation is about that mindset shift. What changes when logistics must perform under real pressure, when delay is not theoretical, and when preparation matters more than optimization. And there are only a few people who have seen that reality more clearly than today's guest. Vice Admiral Walter Massenburg is a decorated, retired three-star admiral. I didn't like it. So how do you want me to tell you about that? The Vice Admiral retired. How do you introduce a military?
I would just say I would say I'd like to introduce Wally Massenburg, a former three-star admiral in the Navy.
All right, that's fine.
That's very informal. And
that's fine. Okay, that's fine. So Jennifer, second edit. Sorry. Okay, she's the one that gets pissed with me. So
okay.
So I want to introduce Vice Admiral Walter Massenburg. He's a decorated three-star admiral with decades of experience in naval aviation, defense logistics, and industrial base sustainment. As commander of Naval Air Systems Command, he led acquisition, engineering, logistics, and test and evaluation for every U.S. naval aviation program, overseeing a multi-billion-dollar portfolio where readiness was never optional. After the Navy, he carried that experience into the private sector, helping organizations strengthen operational capability and leadership at scale through companies like Raytheon and BAE Systems. Today, we're going to explore what commercial supply chains can learn from defense-grade logistics thinking, why readiness is becoming more relevant than efficiency, and what leaders need to understand now is that the way organizations perform, this is the word that I've done any start since I'm not getting going from the beginning for the last time, Wally, and then I'll stop. Okay, I won't do it again.
By the way, this is what happened to me in my performance-based logistics podcast. We had to say stop. That doesn't sound right or whatever.
Yeah, no. So, but it's easier for Jennifer if I just record it. So I'll just go quickly from the top. By now I got it. So my apologies. So
okay. So when you say, I'd like to introduce my special guest, Wally Massenburg, a retired three-star admiral, the former commander of the Naval Air Systems Command. That really does make it more personal. I'm not, and that now you're talking to me as a person. You're not talking to me as.
I was going to do it here, but yeah.
So Wally Massenburg,
that's fine.
Retired three-star admiral, former
that's
commander of the Naval Air Systems Command, and then you're going to nail
it. All right. Okay, so let's get going. So Jennifer, starting from 2650 more or less. For decades, supply chains were optimized for effectiveness and efficiency, cost, speed, scale. But there's a different way to think about supply chain and logistics, one that doesn't begin with cost, but with consequence. In the military, logistics isn't a support function, it's a mission capability. It determines readiness, it determines availability, and in the most critical moments, it determines outcomes. Today's conversation is about that mindset shift. What changes when logistics must perform under real pressure, when delay is not theoretical, and when preparation matters more than optimization. And there are only a few people who have seen that reality more clearly than today's guest. A friend of mine, Wally Massenburg, a retired Vice Admiral is a decorated three-star admiral with decades of experience in naval aviation, defense logistics, and industrial base sustainment. As commander of Naval Air Systems Command, he led acquisition, engineering, logistics, and test and evaluation for every U.S. naval aviation program, overseeing a multi-billion-dollar portfolio where readiness was never optional. After the Navy, he carried that experience into the private sector, helping organizations strengthen operational capability and leadership at scale through companies like Raytheon and BAE Systems. Today, we're going to explore what commercial supply chains can learn from defense-grade logistics thinking, why readiness is becoming more relevant than efficiency, and what leaders need to understand now if they want their organizations to perform when it really matters. Vice Admiral Massenburg, Wally, welcome to the Momentum Flow.
Luis, thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here to discuss this subject area with you, and I'd like to thank you for your work in logistics. Your podcasts have been terrific, and I look forward to participating in this one.
I appreciate it, Wally. Thanks for being here. It's a real privilege to have you here in the Momentum Flow. So you've led at the highest levels of naval aviation and defense logistics, and you carried that experience into industry and private equity, always operating where execution readiness truly matters. I'd love to start with your story. Give us a bit of your journey and how those experiences have shaped the way you think about logistics, leadership, mission readiness. Tell us a little bit about you.
So Luis, and I'll cite the year that it all started. I used to be a program manager, and I say that very lovingly and carefully because as a program manager, I couldn't spell logistics. I was not incentivized to understand it. It was always somebody else's problem. And when I left becoming a program manager, and I had the privilege of serving as a flag officer, the first job that I got was as the Naval Aviation logistician, and I couldn't spell logistics. And so it was a journey of learning, certainly as a flag officer for 8 years, because every job I held was a job that dealt with the subject we're going to talk about. And that's not, output. It's about outcome, and it's about readiness as a metric that we should measure ourselves against, and not just things and stuff or, the rates or whatever. It is truly a metric that matters to the warfighter. So I'd like to start there, Luis, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely. You have a remarkable life story. So let's get that cue. So what keeps your momentum going all along this career?
So one, it's passion for caring about the people that serve. When you get right down to it, everything that I've been motivated for has been to do things to make their job easier. When you ask people why they leave the Navy, and there's a form that you fill out, and each sailor, when they leave the Navy, has to fill it out. Nowhere on there is one, the Navy is a noble profession. Two, I get the tools and the things that I needed to do my job. And three, I love serving with the people I serve. Nowhere on an exit sheet does that appear, for why someone is leaving the Navy. But those three elements are absolutely important, because if all three of those elements aren't there, then people will leave the Navy. And by the way, we're in an all-volunteer force, so you have to care about the people that are actually serving, supporting, and fighting for our country. So it becomes a very noble mission. We need to keep in mind that we have to give them the tools that they need. And the last thing is that make it enjoyable for all that serve to serve together. That's why reunions are really important, because that's the time when you've gone through hell and back with the people you've gone through it with, and the country has given you the tools you needed, and you served in the noble profession, then that's a really good formula for success.
That's a very nice way to frame it, Wally. So now it really infers that you truly see logistics not as a support function, but as a decisive strategic advantage. You care to
Well,
elaborate on that?
yeah, so and interesting, the Naval Air Systems Command has been a command that has existed for as long as naval aviation. We went over the 100-year mark. The Systems Command has had some wonderful leaders, but the Systems Command itself became very internally focused. And when it becomes internally focused, then the Systems Command does engineering, test and evaluation, logistics, all the different disciplines. They if they're looking internally at themselves, then the metrics that they measure themselves are ones they've made up themselves. And it's really important when I took over the job as logistics, is there needs to be a metric that exists outside their organization that they're measured against. And so when I took over the job as logistician, not knowing a whole lot about logistics, but understanding what was broken in naval aviation, it was readiness. And readiness is the measurement of whether you're successful or not. It's really a simple formula. If you have an ON, OFF switch, and you turn the ON, ONF switch to ON, and the system doesn't work, all the money you've spent, all the dedication of all the things to make that system, deliver it, develop it, deliver it, and work has gone to for naught. Because if that ON switch doesn't work in a crisis situation, we have failed our sailors and Marines, and we've failed our country.
I love how you define it. You really answer my next question. You really define readiness. I like your analogy of the on-off switch. It goes from being a concept to really something measurable and actionable. So that makes a lot of sense to me. So let me ask you then, in your experience, how tightly integrated do the different sub-functions, engineering, maintenance, supply, need to be actually, operating to deliver that level of readiness?
So I will give you where we started, and I will try to finish up with where we ended in the Navy, but the consequences were the same in industry. And so what I learned in the Navy, I brought to industry both at BA Systems and at Raytheon. So when I talk about the Navy, I talk about discovery, learning, cycles of learning, and introducing concepts that valued things that the system didn't value before. When I took over the organization in 1999, the organization was stovepiped. Maintenance and supply and engineering and test and evaluation and operators, the whole system operated in stovepipes of activity. Normally, what the behaviors you would find would be that in stovepipes of activity, they valued their stovepipe at the expense of all others. And so what you created was a natural inefficiency in the organization that didn't value what I would consider the greater good. The greater good is, do you give the war fighters the things that they need to fight and have it work when it was required? Nobody went to war and discovered things and corrected things after they went to war. They went to war with what they had. And if they hadn't done the preparation, if they hadn't done the internal look at that thing called readiness, then when you go to war, you're making it up as you go along. If you prepare and you know what you're doing, and you put the right people together in teams, and we're going to talk about teams a lot, then you will enter a war unprepared, and you will always be chasing a tail. So I'd like to start with where it started with, for me, is understanding logistics. So somebody in industry, because I've been in both, would say logistics is, oh, that's just that transportation thing. That's the trucks that are out there moving, and you see things go by, XPL. That's logistics. Well, logistics is 12 integrated logistics elements, and each of those elements, if it's working in a synchronized, synchrophased way, then will deliver whatever metric it is that you design. So the most important thing is to understand the way that you should start thinking about this thing called cross-functional relationships in order to deliver to a greater good metric. So I'd like to talk about greater good metric and how that gets developed.
Go ahead. You want to elaborate right now, or you want to elaborate later?
Nope, we'll talk about it right now because it'll follow into all the other things that you've
Perfect. Go
prompted
ahead.
me for. But so not knowing what I was doing in 1999, went on a journey. And the first thing that you have to understand about teaming is if you don't have a crisis, then you will not be able to effectively and efficiently team because nobody will care. They'll all live in their activities. They'll come to meetings. They'll go home and say to their bosses, "Boy, I sure made it through that meeting, and they didn't get any of my skin." And so the idea of teaming in relation to something greater than themselves becomes the operative functional organization that needs to be developed. And it's a behavior model. It's not a dictated a vertical model that is most important. So the first priorities of the discussion, when you finally get people in the same room together from all these different disciplines, is they have to decide outcome first. Then once you decide what the outcome is, you have a metric, a single metric that goes with that. And once you have that single metric, then you can look at the processes that are necessary to deliver on that metric. And then and only then do you think about organizational structure. People in the military normally every so often they get to change their jobs, and everyone when they get to the new job does what? They try to reorganize, and the answer is every time you try to reorganize, it costs money, people, dollars, intellectual capital in order to do that every time you change. So I'm not saying change is bad, but change needs to be understood in relation to outcome. So the most important thing that you talk about in these transformations to understanding logistics, literally in a denied environment, is outcome. What do you need? How do you want the force to fight? How you're going to measure it in order to deliver on that readiness.
I love how you frame this logistics as a warfight capability. I think, focusing on outcome, and really then focusing on a single metric through strong processes and not worrying too much about the organizational structure, trying to change it. So it makes a lot of sense to me. But obviously, I share that background with you on the logistics side. It's pretty clear to me. I think this sets a strong foundation for a conversation. I would like now, if it's possible, to step into what happens when that system is really under pressure, right? Because it's when the rubber hits the road, right? So without getting into specific conflicts, let's leave that aside. We want to talk about that. But what fundamentally changes in the logistics thinking, when a delay directly impacts the mission success?
So let's talk about the three elements that make up a balanced system. Because if the system is not balanced, then what you get is pendulum swings where people want to spend money in specific areas. There are three areas that are most important. The first one that everybody thinks about, excuse me, is capability. So everybody's willing to spend money on capability. Let's design, develop, and produce the next system.
Mhm.
And so industry mirrors the government in that way of thinking. And
Mhm.
so if you don't change the way you're thinking in the government, then the in industry doesn't change at all. So if the government says capability at all costs, industry says I'll deliver. What they fail to realize, it's a three-headed monster. And the three-headed monster is capability, availability, and affordability. And those three things, those three areas, or those three principles, need to be balanced if you're ever going to have a war-fighting focus or force that can fight on day one. And so when I took over in 1999, our organization called Naval Aviation was totally focused, 100%. I'm telling you, 100% on capability. And here was the comment that the powers to be would use. Well, if we don't build it, then you won't need the logistics. And so what they would end up doing is they would mortgage logistics in order to get things built to a requirement that was not a real requirement. It was, we need 27 airplanes. Okay, why do you need 27 airplanes? Well, if you don't start with readiness in mind and work your way back to why you need those 27 aircraft, then what you're doing is building aircraft just to build aircraft and not aligned to any type of warfighting capability
And
that's
that doesn't really necessarily adds to availability, and definitely doesn't help with affordability, to your words. It makes all sense. So now, the on the other hand, you on the military want to build redundancy, right? And the pre-positioning and planning depth needs to evolve in those environments. So how do these concepts, redundancy, prepositioning, planning, evolve in this environment where you're trying to to lead, and to build an army literally for battle, or or at least to be ready in case of. So
sure. So they're signals that we get in the providing community, and I'll call it providing community because providing is, supply, it's maintenance, it's test evaluation, it's all the disciplines or the 12 logistics elements as far as aligning to a war plan. And there are war plans for contingencies all over the world. Most of them are secret in nature. But what it does is it gives decision makers the understanding of what they want. For instance, I want to fight a two front war. Well, that creates a very significant logistics problem in getting the actual units there, having them manned, trained, and equipped, ready to fight with all the stuff that they need, given different war scenarios. And if the system says, well, I want to be able to fight two wars at one time. By the way, that's probably somewhere in the war plans to fight two wars at one time. What they do is they talk themselves into how capability is going to affect those war plans, and not readiness that is the true effect of what shows up on day one of whatever war you're trying to fight. So you really have to convince people that that this balancing of capability, that's what you buy, that's what you deliver, availability, which is when it gets out there, and how often do you want it to be available. Of course, the powers to be will say, I want 100% availability. That's crazy, because if you're really talking logistics and you're going to have this Ford available 100% of the time, well, when do you do the maintenance? How do you buffer for supply? What if there's all these other questions that you have to answer, which in some of the planners' minds doesn't exist? They say, no, we're going to have 100% of this on day one.
it's
So
interesting how
when you start looking at the now affordability, which is the governor on what you can afford between capability and availability, then all of a sudden you start to realize that you must balance it every time that a budget is done every year. And if you don't do that, then you're going to end up with, in some cases, what we've ended up with in the past, and that's a force that shows up that's not ready. So readiness, this concept of readiness, is really important, and the concept of a single fleet-driven metric is superbly important, and it goes through the thread of readiness today. That's the force you have. Readiness tomorrow. That's the force that you're building, meaning what you're developing and producing. And then readiness in the deep future, all the new things that are coming down line in the world of logistics that can ensure you're going to be able to afford the things in capability and availability that you need to have, and have it show up when it's required. Very important concept, though.
I fully agree. You hinted on that description. You also hinted about the effective decision making. How does it look like when all this, on top of everything, you're operating with uncertainty, and in compressed timelines now. So
Yep.
how that the speed of decision making,
So,
it doesn't sound like it's very expeditious from what you described.
well, the speed of decision making in war is pretty quick, because you get to make decisions based on crisis. I mean, whether it's at a platoon level or a battalion level or whatever, what if they're running out of ammunition, or what if they're running out of this? What if they're running out of that? Decision making becomes very local.
Mhm.
However, decision making when you have time in order to make decisions that have consequences in those crisis situations of war, that's the time to think about it, and that's the time where people and decision makers should consider this single fleet driven or customer driven metric. And that's a customer driven metric at cost, at predictable cost. And so you never lose the capability, availability, and affordability monikers, because what you have is I want to get to the capability, everything I want, and all of a sudden this ugly thing called availability reaches up the head, and the logisticians of the world say you just can't do that. Wars are not fought on capability alone. In fact, once you're in a protracted war, logistics is king. If you can't support fleets and you can't support battalions and you can't support armies that are marching without supply, without maintenance, without all the logistics elements, guess what? You're going to run out of Schlitz, as Patton did in running out of gas and whatever in one of those campaigns when they were marching to Germany. So logistics becomes extremely important, and it's best to think about that before you ever go to war.
So it's very interesting because just using again the concept that you bring to the conversation. So it sounds like capability and affordability assessments are happen before the crisis or before the mission. However, once you're in the middle of it, everything is around availability and around logistics, and that's because the cost of failure is real, right?
So
Is that a fair statement?
it's a fair statement, but it's when is the decision made that determines failure. So if the decision is made to get to the capability at all costs, but you mortgage your future, your future war scenarios availability in order to buy that all that capability and availability, what shows up is a warfighting capability that doesn't work. That's the ON OFF switch. So unless you look at it as a whole, and a whole is capability, availability, and affordability. And what you're trying to achieve is an outcome. And if you keep redefining the outcome, what you get used to is decision making as if you wanted something to show up in day one. And then you have these rich conversations between people who design, develop, produce. Instead of abandon, it's design, develop, produce, and sustain. And sustain, the metric of sustainment is readiness. For instance, in aviation, naval aviation, early on, what we tried to do is come up with a metric. And because we were having trouble putting people through the training commands, because the training command aircraft didn't fly, we had to look at it, the metric as aviation aviation training squadron aircraft availability. That's the metric we started with. Now you notice I didn't say anything about cost. You
Mhm.
notice I just concentrated on training aircraft, and yet the training aircraft is just a small percentage of it. But we learned in that cycle of learning is that if we didn't have the airplanes and the people and the pilots and the maintenance and the supply to get those training aircraft up and operating when they were needed, then guess what? We continued to fail in the training command, and we continued to fail to make pilots. So that was our training ground. It was a thing called NAPI, Naval Aviation Pilot Production Initiative, where we turned things from vertical to horizontal. And through this cycle of learning, we started to learn about all the logistics elements. There are 12 of them. I won't list them, but hopefully you'll provide readers with a copy of the 12 elements. But we understood how important each of those elements were in relation to that metric, which is training aircraft. availability, training aircraft availability. Now you notice we just ran the pendulum to availability,
Mhm.
uh, but we didn't, you know, cover the thing was what would we run? What happens when we run out of those airplanes and we got to buy new?
Yeah.
Well, we didn't count on that. So any time of these pendulum swings to one or the other or to affordability as a metric, if it's a metric by itself, we're guaranteeing failure in the end game.
It's really interesting talking with you on military terms because only it comes across your passion for the topic, but as you talk, I also hear a lot of analogies with, for example, manufacturing systems when the measure of operation effectiveness efficiency OEE, where you had to is a product of quality, machine equipment availability, and labor availability is similar in concept. So to me, the morale here is there's a lot of applicability of best-in-class practices in the military to the logistics and the supply chain. So let we can continue talking about this, but we only
No,
have
no,
so
I want
much
to
time,
talk about
Wally.
your
So
last point, Luis. I want to talk about that last point and a translation to like a manufacturing line or
mhm.
a production line or whatever. Teaming, teams exist everywhere if people want them to exist. If you live in a archaic way of thinking in industry today, and you keep stovepipes in place without any cross functionality or cross communication or whatever, then you're guaranteed to be less effective, and then therefore less efficient. And so the concept that you just said that whatever I talked about with this aircraft training aircraft problem exists in a value stream in industry, and everyone has its similar requirements. For instance, if I were to take that line and I'd say, "What do you want of that line? What do you want the outcome to be?" Well, if you're talking just to the line supervisor, he would say, "Outcome. Get the stuff out as quickly as you can. Damn quality, damn all these other things I got to worry about. Just get it out the door and meet the requirement that's been given to me," which, by the way, becomes a financial requirement.
let's dig into that. So why do you think most commercial supply chains struggle to achieve readiness then?
So, well, readiness is made up of a bunch of different things at a bunch of different levels. And we were in that first instance where we're talking training aircraft, we were just taking a snapshot of a piece of naval aviation that was failing. The rest of naval aviation was already failing, but this piece, if we solve this piece, maybe we could find the model that works. And so what we did in these cycles of learning is we solved the training aircraft problem. Now I'll give you the bad side of that, the unintended consequences. Because when we solved that cycle time problem, which because that's what it was, and we brought all to bear of all the logistics elements, guess what we did in the end game in the year that we were doing that work? We produced 239 pilots in excess of requirement because of how efficient we got. And literally that year, we had to say goodbye out of service to 239 budding naval aviators who really wanted to be in the Navy and fly airplanes. They had to leave service because we didn't understand the consequences of being so effective and so efficient.
So you exceeded the target of readiness target.
Because there was no governor on it. There was nobody that was looking at the whole and says, wait a minute, okay, we had a problem building aviators. We solved that problem. By the way, that was an industry government team that solved that problem. But then you get to the next problem is, well, we made too many. Well, the
Mhm.
system isn't ready to
To do
act to that
less.
or react to that. So when you talk about outcome, you always got to give yourself the opportunity to change the outcome. In other
Mhm.
words, change the metric when it makes sense. So the metric changed from training aircraft, ready to all aircraft ready.
Yeah.
And when you made that change, boy, it got really hard really quick
But
because when I took over, there were 72 type model series aircraft teams. That is, one team would be a F-18A model aircraft. That would be one team, one configuration. There were 75 of them when I started, 40 when I left, because when you look at logistics, every time you have a different configuration, guess what follows?
It's a different SKU, it's a different bill of materials, it's a different everything.
Different everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we went on this journey, we had to learn what the outcome had to be as we started to grow this good behavior model. Mm-hmm. And the good behavior model, by the way, it went from aircraft ready for tasking. Training aircraft ready for tasking to aircraft ready for tasking. Then all of a sudden, in the middle of this, we found out that dollars cost matters. And we said, wait a minute, you can't have a metric unless there is a cost associated with it. And so we had a cycle of learning, an aha moment. And the cycle of learning said, okay, now I'm going to shift from training aircraft now to all aircraft. Now it's all aircraft at cost. And boy, did that change the dynamic, because now it wasn't, geez, we have all the money in the world to spend on this. We had to, understand what was the money available for the readiness we could actually buy.
So you read
different model, but the outcome changed, the metric changed, and in the end game, it was, now listen to this, aviation units. That's the things, the supply, the people, the ranges, the exercise, whatever, at reduced cost. So once that became the metric, aviation units ready for tasking at reduced cost. Boy, did that metric change, and we accelerated our ability to be ready.
So let me translate this to the audience to more traditional commercial supply chain, right? I think Wally hinted about what I will call portfolio management, right? Number of units or number of types of aircrafts and equipments. He also hinted to the concept of on-time delivery or fill rate, and all that balancing with cost. So I think the moral here, there's a lot of parallels within the military side and the commercial supply chains, and a lot of learnings that can be done from one to the other. Now, where do you normally see, Wally, or where do you see industries more consistently underestimating systemic risks? Because at the end, it is the risk of the full system of not delivering the outcome, right? So where do you normally see that underestimating on the not on the military, but on the more corporate America side?
So I will try to be very short with this little anecdote. But when I took over as a systems command, that was in essence in charge of all of naval aviation, not flying it, man training equipment. I had a hand in all that. I asked the CEOs of the 11 largest companies that created, stuff to make naval aviation work. And I put them in a room and I said, hey, look, I've been out of program management for a while. This was 5 years after I left the capabilities side of the house. And I got them in a room and I showed them a picture of an F-18 that had no wings, no engines, no nose, no nothing. It was just sitting on no landing gear because it was sitting on crates. And I showed them that. And I said, look, if you're going to do work with me and honor our contractual obligations, then you have to help me solve that problem, that sick airplane, because everybody in this room, all 11 of these companies, had something on that airplane that caused that airplane to look like that. And it was interesting because when I asked the question, it says, what motivates you? And they said, we build you things. And I said, well, unless you help me with that problem, then I'm not going to, give you any more contracts. And by the way, I'm the head of contracting authority and I'll just stop all of them. And they were shocked. You want me to take care of that airplane that looks like that? I said, yes, because you can take care of that airplane that has no wings, no landing gear, no engines, no radars, no systems in it. It's just sitting there like a carcass way earlier in the cycle to go on a journey with me that is much more performance based because I need things at the end that don't look like that. That's what I need. And so I went on a journey with them, a government industry team that valued readiness first, outcome first, aviation units ready for tasking at predictable costs. And when you got to predictable costs, you reduced the costs. And that became, in my context, the profit of naval aviation. When you could get to the point where you were satisfying the readiness requirement or the outcome at a particular cost, now you went on a journey to do cycle time reduction or reliability improvement, coincidentally with industry and government, to make that picture of that Hangar Queen aircraft to look just as sharp as it was and ready to fight when you needed it. And oh, by the way, they went on that journey when government led them there. If government doesn't lead them there, then they'll stay in the same model that they're in, which values capability at all costs, and that means they'll value a system that does not work and does not deliver readiness.
That's a pretty rich way of framing it. I appreciate all that context. We're gonna have to move to our last section. I'm gonna do a little bit different here.
Okay.
I have 3 or 4 questions, and I'm gonna be looking more for short answers just to
Yep.
get your perspective on that. So one is on the leadership under pressure. If you had to pick 3 leadership behaviors that are essential when operating in high stakes, high complexity systems, you only have 3 bullets. Which one you pick?
The first one is make a decision. So, make a decision is a function of time.
Okay.
You can make a decision in peacetime without really a time constraint. I mean, they may put a time constraint on it, but again, it's make a decision. If you can make decisions, appropriate decisions in peacetime, when you get to war and you're in crisis and make decisions in crisis, you have to make the decision. So if you haven't taught yourself how to do that
Right.
in peacetime, it ain't going to work in wartime.
So that's your first bullet. The second one?
The second one is trust your teams. You can't possibly do everything, and if you're a leader, what it requires for you is first of all to build teams. People in leadership will tell you that it's not you're not going to solve the problem yourself. You're not one guy with a rifle is going to go out there because you're leading people over the hill. That's not how it works. You develop those teams, whether they're an industry and government teams, whether they're type model series teams, whether they're cross-functional teams in industry, whether they're a production team on the shop floor, whatever it is. If you don't produce that team to where they have trust and confidence in you, then when crisis hits, remember what I said about crisis
Yeah.
to begin with? If you can't team very capably unless you can address crisis.
Right.
So bottom line is develop teams. So the first one is be able to make the decision. Second one is have a team that's going to support those decisions.
Okay, you pick 2 bullets only. Those are the 2 that you pick?
No, I got all this, but the next one that
Okay.
I would pick would be put together a succession plan. If you happen to drop dead, it's a terrible thought, but if you happen to drop dead today, the team and leadership on the team would be able to pick up the slack right off the bat and operate as if you weren't there.
It's so interesting that you pick those 3 because the 3 of them are not talking about the equipment or the process. They focus on the people side, right? And at
Right.
the end, it's so important at the end of the game, they help people interact in systems, whether it's in logistics in the military or is on commercial logistics, it's the same concept. So make decisions, trust teams, and succession plan. I love those.
Well,
So let me,
let's one last thought to that. I'm a big metric guy. When I didn't have a voice, back when I was a first caught flag officer with this big problem, I decided I was going to go out to every air station, every ship that I could get to while it was in port every year. So they saw me year after year. And my metric was shake 1,000 hands.
Mhm.
Shake 1,000 hands. So, so I'll give you this little scenario. When you shake 1,000 hands, it takes some time, but not
Mhm.
much time. I used to go on a ship. They'd probably have 2,000 people on the hangar deck. I'd be addressing them on these subjects we're talking about. But before I address them, I shook 1,000 or 2,000 hands, whatever it was. So at the end of a conversation one time, somebody in the audience said, "Why is it that you shook all our hands?" Because I told them is it's the only thing you're going to remember. You're not going to remember a thing I'm going to say. The other thing is I've taken 20 minutes of your question and answer time.
So you're cheating. You're doing that with me, Wally. That's not fair. Okay. So hey, we're converging on the conversation. So maybe a last one in this section, then we're gonna have to converge down. So
Okay.
at the end, how do you build organizations that are truly designed for continuity under stress? Because that's something that the military excels at. Not just performance stable conditions, right? That's I would argue that's easier or different at least, but continuity under stress is unique, right? It's a skill. So how do you build them?
So again, go back to teaming and what kind of stress do you put on the team? If you, I will tell you this: if you don't have a crisis, then people will come meet. They'll call themselves a team, and they'll have no skin in the game. They come to a table. I can go back and tell my boss there I didn't lose any of his equity. That's not the way this works. This works is your teamwork and your objectives on your teams become more important than your connection to your boss, who writes your fitness report, who pays you, who does all these things in order for you to succeed personally. So you really have to instill in a team the fact that a crisis drives them to a particular place. If they don't have a crisis, I always used to say, create a crisis, because
I don't know.
they're not going to get together if they don't. It's not being dishonest with them. It's just being they won't get together unless you create a crisis that they all
Yeah.
can
I
recognize.
wouldn't call it create a crisis. I would create the burning platform because I don't like to create crisis, but I understand the concept is valid nonetheless. So let me one last question, Wally. So at the end, this podcast is called the momentum flow, right? Because at the
Yes.
end of the day, it's all about how leaders build and sustain momentum when it really matters, when it matters most. So, as you think about everything you've seen in your career, from mission critical operations to building capabilities at scale, what's the one mindset from your perspective that leaders need to carry forward to keep that momentum going? Especially going back to the previous question, when the stakes are highest, when there's a burning platform, when there's a crisis.
So when the world is not in crisis, you should continue to measure yourself with the outcome that you desire in crisis, which means the outcome is always going to be readiness. The outcome for a supply guy isn't just availability, it's availability in relation to the readiness requirement. Again, uh, in peacetime, you have to be jealous and protect readiness. If not, the money people will take money out of that to do things they want to do. And so true leadership is understanding when you're not in crisis to protect the things that are most important when you get into crisis. And that is readiness. Always readiness.
It's so interesting that concept because I go back in memory lane to COVID times, right? The companies that fared better were the ones that at the end, on every day before the crisis, they were operating at the same standard. And then when they went into crisis, they just had to continue doing the same. Yes, some extra challenges, but they were used to operate at that standard. And when you're used to do it, you can do it. When you don't, you know, companies struggle, the military struggles, right? So
So I'll give you one anecdote in the industry side of that. When I was a quality guy in Raytheon, I was hired in as a quality guy in Raytheon to begin with, just to get me on board. But I went and got qualified as a an ASQ, credentialed guy in quality. And the interesting thing is in crisis, if you don't consider quality in the normal activity of your day, then you create crises when a system goes out to the end and can't deliver because of your commitment to quality. So quality is like readiness, you can't, it's not touchy-feely, whatever, until such time as it turns into a crisis itself. So take that in times of peacetime. If you care about readiness always, and readiness is capability, availability, and affordability in a balanced approach, then we'll have a force that will fight. In industry, if you care about readiness, i.e., whatever you're delivering out the door to whomever you're delivering it to on their metric, then capability, availability, affordability for that outcome. If you don't think in terms of that, then you get all sorts of wacky things going on. Chasing budgets and taking money out, and and industry follows government, and that's that again. Leadership in industry and government needs to work together to create a force that can fight. Same in industry, deliver whatever their product is. That's their product to fight.
I think that's a great place to leave this conversation. With the note of capability, availability, and affordability, I think you made that point very. It should resound in people, resounds in my head. At the end, Wally, thanks for this conversation, and sharing your perspective and experience so candidly. It's been a real privilege for me to have you at the Momentum Flow. Thank you.
Lisa, it's great to know you. It's been great for the year and a half or so that we've been associated, but I couldn't wait to get on this podcast.
I appreciate that, Wally. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Luis.
At the end, to the audience, what stands from this conversation with Wally, with Vice Admiral Massenburg, is a fundamental shift in how we think about logistics and leadership. This isn't about optimizing systems for efficiency only. It's about designing organizations that can perform when it truly matters. The idea of readiness comes through clearly. It's built well before the moment of need, through integration, discipline, and deliberate preparation. And whether in defense or in industry, the lesson is consistent. When systems are under real pressure, performance is not determined by intent, but by design. For leaders today, the takeaway is simple, while not easy. Move beyond efficiency at the end goal and start building for continuity, for decision velocity, and resilience under stress. That's where the real momentum is created and then sustained. So to our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share with your fellow operators, innovators, leaders across the different parts of the supply chain ecosystem. I'm Luis Solana, and this is the Momentum Flow, where clarity, capital, and conviction keep supply chains and leaders moving forward. Until next time, stay curious, stay connected, and keep the momentum flow going. Thanks for listening.